Hello, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Zeise is Right video by Post-Gazette sports columnist Paul Zeise. We're going to be talking Justin Fields and how he fits in the modern NFL with passing rates dropping around the league. Is some of the freak out that I've seen in some spaces about his stat line warranted, or is this just maybe the new world of the NFL? We're going to get into that. We got a lot of backyard brawl reaction. What does it mean for Pitt season? What does it mean for West Virginia and Neal Brown's future there? Then maybe a little Pirates, a little Penn State, and a little Penguins to wrap up the show. Before we get started, just want to thank our primary sponsor, Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. All right, Paul, let's get into this Justin Fields stats talk, because I've seen a lot about it. I think he's what 117 yards in the win against Denver, 273 in the two games. You know, that's usually like one good game for a quarterback. He's got that in two games, just the one touchdown. But at the same time, as I wrote in my Pro Football Focus grades post on Tuesday, league-wide passing averages are way down from what I think people really think that they are and perceive that they are. They're at 193.6 per team this season. That's down from 218.9 last season. So that's a sizable percentage. And then down substantially from 243.8 at the 2015 peak. When you look at that, Paul, doesn't what Justin Fields is doing look a lot more like what is happening around the NFL, even if you'd like it to be a little bit better, and certainly you'd like to see them finishing more drives and turning them into touchdowns rather than field goals. But on the whole, you know, if you're looking at how he's performing statistically, it's really not that bad.
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest things to me about it is that that he's doing what they're asking him to do. I mean, that's all of this freak out about what they're doing, and they've only scored one touchdown, and he's not throwing the ball enough, and all this other. I mean, Adam, and I wrote about this earlier this week. They basically said in weeks 1 and 2, they want their quarterback to just not get in the way. That's basically what they said. They basically said we need to get out of these two places with our defense just leading the way. We need to get out of these two places with one more point than the other team, which is what they did. And so my thing is, if you run the ball, like they've really attempted to try and run the ball. And Justin Fields' legs have been a part of, getting a couple of first downs here and there and all that other stuff. And you punt well, which they have. Of course, now they're down to their third punter. So I don't know what's going on. Didn't their other guy get hurt? I think either way, it doesn't matter. My point is they punted the ball really well. And they play great defense. And so they've been able to get a little lead, Adam, and their attitude once they've gotten a lead, you've seen it, has been as long as we don't turn the ball, especially this week against Bo Nix. They basically said, as long as we don't turn the ball over, we do not believe this guy can drive them down the field for a score. Now, what has to happen here, and it's going to inevitably, is when they get behind in a game, what is it going to look like? And I'm not. I think they were down 10-6 maybe to the Falcons, or 10-9 or something at half, whatever it was. I'm talking about, okay, now you get down, 14-3. Okay, now what are you going to do? That's when I'll make judgments about Justin Fields versus the rest of the league in terms of the passing, because at the end of the day, he hasn't had to do any of that. All they've had to do is not turn it over, which he has. All he's had to do is make a few plays with his legs, which he has, and then, one or two chunk throws a game. And so I think that I get it in terms of people basically saying, well, they've only scored one touchdown in 2 games. How can you feel good about it? Well, their goal was to win the 2 games, and they figured out a formula to do it. The first week of the season, they played a really rusty Kirk Cousins. Now clearly he was a little bit better in week 2 than he was in week 1. they played a little bit rusty Kirk Cousins, and then they played Bo Nix, who was completely – I mean, you want to talk about a guy who was completely overwhelmed by a defense. And if that's the case, all you got to do is, I hate to go back to that old Dave Wannstedt saying, but in that case, your attitude really has to be any drive that ends in a kick is a good one. And, that's I know that's a Stone Age way to look at football. But in their case, in Atlanta, they kicked 5 field goals, and punting is not a bad thing. It's much better than giving teams the short field because you turn it over.
But, I think my point, Paul, is, and yes, I agree. You want to see them win games in different ways. You want to see a team, come from behind and win before you really start to believe. But the Steelers can only play the hand that's in front of them. And, I don't know that it is Stone Age football to say that you can win this way. I think there's a lot of innovation going on, with running games. It's not like it was in the 90s where you hand the ball off to your running back 35 times. But, teams are trying to run more creatively now. And I think that's reflected in those stats I rattled off at the top, and Stone Age compared to what? Because I'll rattle off some more for you here. He is 5th in passing grade with Pro Football Focus, 8th in adjusted completion percentage, which basically completion percentage with drops factored out. He's tied for 2nd in big time throws, which is some of the best throws in the NFL across a given week. He has no turnover worthy plays, let alone actual turnovers. I think the only thing in his statistical profile you can really criticize is his average depth of target is 6.8. I mean, that's not explosive. That's not great. But again, he's had some big plays wiped out as well by penalties. So I guess the question is, Paul, well, is Stone Age compared to what? What are the other teams in the NFL doing? And are we just ignorant to where these trends are going when we're watching Justin Fields and expecting him to look like Ben Roethlisberger in his prime?
Well, I think, again, if you think about it, just think about it this way. Like San Diego, who they're going to, I'm not San Diego. What are they? The Los Angeles Chargers or the Las Vegas Chargers or wherever the hell they're from now? The Chargers. If you look at the way they play, are they playing any differently than the Steelers? Not really, right? I mean, they're playing the same game.
I actually looked at this stat too, Paul, that he only has Justin Herbert only has 1 more passing yard than Justin Fields on the season. Right.
And I think have you watched the Chargers at all? Have you watched either of their games? Because they both have been on. I'm going to tell you, Adam, you've got a guy who's supposedly a franchise elite quarterback, and they treat him the same way the Steelers treat Fields. Like, they don't let him throw the ball down the field a lot. He's not pitching it all over the yard. They're lining up with multiple tight ends, multiple, big packages. They've got a fullback, for God's sakes, and they're running right at you and grinding it out. They're playing good special teams. They're kicking it well. They're punting it well. They're playing great defense, and they're just grinding out ugly wins. I mean, I know that the difference is I think they won what was it this week? Maybe like 23-10 instead of the Steelers winning 16-10 or whatever it was. I don't know, 13-3 or whatever. I mean, they've scored a little bit more points than the Steelers, but all in all, they're playing the same exact game. And Adam, this would be an interesting thing for you because you're really good at these statistical analyses and all that kind of stuff. But I would like to know the percentage of teams that are playing this way now, because it feels like the pendulum swung back a little bit, right? For a while, it was like, oh, well, you got to go wide open and throw the ball over the yard and, throw for 400, 350 yards every game. And, now I think a lot less teams are frowning. I think a lot less teams are frowning upon being almost a run-first team, right? And making sure that they control the clock, they control the ball, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I think it gets back to how much has Mike Tomlin talked about wanting some mobility and that being part of what they want at quarterback and part of what they've lacked and maybe part of what's gone wrong with Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky. Those guys were mobile, but they weren't mobile quite in the same way that Justin Fields is. And here's my next question for you, Paul, is that are a lot of people just trapped back somewhere in 2015 when it was throw the ball all over the yard? Because I asked this question on a podcast last year, and I'll ask it again now. How many Hall of Fame quarterbacks are in the NFL right now? Are there like Brady, Rodgers, Ben, Phil Rivers, both Manning brothers, Drew Brees? Those guys were all in the league at the same time, and we're all doing that stuff, at the same time. And I think it has distorted people's perception of how quarterback play is always supposed to look. Because I think if you look around the league right now, you say Mahomes is clearly a Hall of Famer. I think you can look at Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and see it if they get a few more career benchmarks. But how many more guys beyond that can you really sit and say are going to be like that? What was it? Early 2000s to 2020 window where you had all those phenomenal quarterbacks?
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, even a guy like Lamar Jackson could be a Hall of Famer, but I don't know that he's would fit in the mold of those other guys we're talking about as a passer. He might just be a Hall of Famer because of all his combined yards and all the other stuff he does. But Burrow, I think, obviously has a chance, but he's got to do a whole lot more. I don't know that he's a lock by any measure. Same thing with Josh Allen. I mean, I think he's got a shot. Maybe a young guy like C.J. Stroud has an outside shot eventually. But you're right. The elite passers just don't. It's not a. Think about it in that group that you're talking about when Brees and Ben and Peyton Manning and Eli Manning and Brady and they had all those guys out there, and there was a number of other guys that were really good quarterbacks at throwing the ball. I mean, the league is changing a little bit, and I think one of the things that's happening is that there are less of those top elite quarterbacks. And B, I think teams are sort of figuring out ways that you can actually play defense. For a couple of years there, right? There was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years where it was like, well, the rules make it so it's almost impossible to play defense. Well, I think that somewhat pendulum has swung back from the standpoint of I think teams have sort of figured out how to play defense.
Yeah, it does feel like, kind of a reinvented 90s in football right now where, it's like I said before, it's not 35, carries for a running back, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. It's more innovative. It looks more like what the 49ers are doing with guys like Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, all in those backfields, moving them around formations, stuff like that. And I think it's just useful for us to perceive that the NFL world is changing when we watch the Steelers and not hold them to the standard of what Ben Roethlisberger used to do. I think it's difficult because Ben Roethlisberger was here recently enough for us all to remember. I mean, what was it, 2020, end of 2021 he retired? So it's not like, Ben Roethlisberger's 10 years in the past. He's 2-3 years in the past. And so people still kind of have that perception of what a quarterback of the Steelers is supposed to look like. But, there's a reason that things didn't work out for Ben in those later years because those passing trends were already coming down. Now they're down a lot this year, but that is the world in which Ben Roethlisberger retired into and that the Steelers have entered without him. So, I think it's an interesting conversation. Any other Steelers thoughts on your mind this week, Paul, before we move on?
No, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. This is a week, I think, that we're going to basically find out who's your starting quarterback. Because I think if Justin Fields wins this game, I'm not sure how in the world you go back to Russell Wilson unless Fields gets hurt. I mean, at the end of the day, you're probably beating a playoff caliber team. I think you're going to have to score some points, but they've proven they can win with him. And so I think this is a huge game for the quarterback discussion because if Russell Wilson gets healthy, then it becomes, well, is he going to be your starter? Is he going to be your starter? Well, you know what? I think that Justin Fields has a chance to win the job this weekend. So that's to me what I'm going to be watching.
Yes, I think that is very interesting. And, I'll be honest, Paul, the further we get into this week, I really don't even know that you can count on Russell Wilson being healthy in the next week or two. I think that's what people are hoping for. But I haven't noticed any tone change or anything that's really changed to suggest that the situation is on the verge of Russell Wilson being in there. It still feels like Justin Fields may have a couple of weeks beyond this one, even if he does not play well in this game to kind of win that job. Let's move on to the Backyard Brawl, though. Before we do, just want to thank another sponsor. It's Goldberg, Persky, and White. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky, and White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Okay, Paul, college football talk. What is the bar for Pitt now? You get these two huge comeback wins. Assuming you beat Youngstown State on Saturday, it's the first time, since they've been in a conference that they will have an undefeated non-conference schedule. They'll be 4-0. They only have two ranked opponents on the slate as of today. One's Clemson, one's Louisville. You had Boston College, who was in the poll last week, a couple other teams that are on the fringes of that conversation. But still, as of today, you got two ranked teams on the schedule. So it looks like it's a manageable slate. Is it going to be a disappointment if we're not talking about 8 or 9 wins for Pitt by the end of the season?
You already have 4. I guess we shouldn't count the chickens before they hatch, but if you don't have 4, it's a completely different conversation. Put it that way. You only have 4. I mean, if you have 4 already, I mean, I have to. I can't recall who they actually have on their schedule from the ACC. I mean, there are some games that look a little bit more difficult. North Carolina, obviously, on the road. That's always been a tough place for Pitt. They play Syracuse, who looks like they're a much better team than they probably we thought they would be at the beginning of the year. But to me, you've got an opportunity this year. I think this is a lot like the Kenny Pickett year, where I don't know that the ACC is very good, and if it's down, I mean, I remember at the beginning of the season when Georgia Tech beat Florida State and everyone celebrated like Georgia Tech was some great team. And it's kind of turned out that Florida State stinks. You know what I mean? It's like, well, Georgia Tech is as good as Memphis, who just who just beat up Florida State last weekend. So, listen, if they don't get 8 wins, there's something wrong. I'll say that right now. With that schedule, the way the conference is, I'm not saying they got to go 10-2 or 11-1. I'm not saying they got to get to the ACC championship game, but if they don't get to 8 wins, there's a problem. Because I think that, and again, people get mad. Oh, well, you're just, disrespecting the ACC and all this other stuff. It's not about that. I try and be realistic. And I look at the schedule that's ahead of them. Louisville, like you said, is a tough game. I'm trying to pull it up right here. Louisville's a tough game. And then, do they play Boston College? Because that could be I think.
Yeah, they played Boston College the last week.
I think Bill O'Brien has something. I don't know. I'm not ready to say that Boston College is basically anything more than I think an interesting team. But it looks like it's not an automatic win, so to speak. I mean, next week they play Cal, or 2 weeks they play Cal. That's a very interesting game, Adam. Because Cal went into Auburn or Mississippi State or one of those places and won.
They beat Auburn.
Auburn, yeah, down there. So if you look at what they have, and then at SMU, I don't think that's an easy schedule, an easy game either. So they do have some challenges, but at the end of the day, they need to find a way to win 4 of these games after Youngstown State. You know what I'm saying? You want to tell me that they lose to Clemson and Louisville? Okay, but you got to beat the Boston Colleges and the Virginias of the world.
Yeah, I agree. I think 8's got to be the minimum at this point. And I think if you get into the mix of 9, 10, then you're in the conversation for the ACC championship game. And like you said, Paul, I think there's a lot of parity in this conference, which kind of cuts 2 ways. It's really easy, I think, to pick up a loss or 2 along the way and lose a tiebreaker, not end up in the ACC championship game. But I also think if you go on a run and you get a little magic, which is what we've seen these last couple of weeks, you can have a season like Kenny Pickett had and Pitt had a few years ago and go on. Nobody saw that run coming. No one picked Pitt to win the conference going into that season.
Not at all.
And so I don't think that the landscape has materially changed. I think Pitt just botched some things in the past year that's changed our perception of them back down toward, where it was before they won the ACC championship. So certainly something interesting to consider there. Did you have any thoughts on the Pat Narduzzi comments about the officials? It seems like he cannot do these. It seems like he made that guarantee against Miami in Kenny Pickett's, first season when they upset them, and he made the guarantee and they won. And since then, he cannot help himself from making out-of-pocket comments to sideline reporters.
No, I mean, I think but isn't that him, Adam? That's what I love about him. I know some people don't like it. I mean, I did an interview with him where he said, and this is just him. He can't help himself. It was right in the preseason, and I said, yeah, you guys have lost a lot of high-profile guys on defense, because what's his name, Deion Hayes and all those guys that went, transferred. I said, you got, you lost a bunch of these high-profile guys on defense. How do you replace them? This, that, and the other thing. And he says to me, well, first of all, those high-profile guys led us to 3 wins last year. Basically can't help himself. You know what I'm saying? So, I love his fire and his feistiness. And the thing about it is he won, right? He won. So he can say whatever he wants to say. It doesn't come off his sour grapes. He didn't lose. If he lost and said that, I'd probably have a little bit more of an issue with it. But he won the game, so go ahead, pay your $5,000 and say whatever you want to say.
Yeah, it is becoming his thing just to make. You can't miss his post game or mid game or whatever they interview him on the field. You can't miss it because he's always got something to say. Neal Brown on the other side though loses this game in heartbreaking fashion, pounded by Penn State in week 1. What do you think his future is at WVU? What do you think his future should be at WVU? And do you think that this is still a team, for the same reasons we looked at Pitt and said, there's a lot of parity in the ACC. You can go on a run. Do you look at West Virginia and say that there was enough there on Saturday that they can still compete in that Big 12 and maybe win 8-9 games and be a solid team?
No, I think this is it. I think the Neal Brown era is going to come to an end. I really do. And let me pull up their schedule, and I'll tell you why. A
lot of ranked teams.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a tough schedule. From what I saw the other day against Pitt, they're not going to be able to stop anybody. I mean, it took Pitt a little bit of time to kind of figure out what they were doing on defense, but they had so many, blown assignments. They had so many guys out of position. They gave up so many big plays. I don't see them stopping anybody that they play. So, 6-6, 7-5 is probably what we're looking at. I mean, if you look at it, they got to play Kansas, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State. The next 3 weeks, what I'm saying, they got to play 3 of the next 4 games are against ranked opponents. Then they got to play at Arizona. I don't think Cincinnati's that good, but that's probably going to be an interesting game just because. I don't know, man. I don't see 8 or 9 wins on that schedule. And if they don't get to 8 or 9 wins, I can't imagine that the Neal Brown era goes on because at this point, what are we really talking about? I think West Virginia fans are getting a little antsy as it is. They lose to Penn State, which is obviously not a bad loss at all. Losing to Pitt the way they lost, however, starts down the bad road. So, I expect them to beat Kansas, but then after that, boy, they got some really difficult games. And, if they lose 2 or 3 of those games, now you're talking about 5 losses, right? I mean, you're talking about 4 or 5 losses with like 5 games to play. It could turn into 6-6 real easy.
Yeah, well, I think the Penn State loss is destabilizing on some level because I think there was so much hype for that being a week 1 game, big noon Saturday, that a lot of West Virginia fans had talked themselves into, okay, West Virginia might lose this game, but they wanted to put a scare into Penn State. They wanted to be a tough place to play, and it just plainly did not work out that way. So I do think that is something that goes into the Neal Brown conversation as well. And to your point, it's not just the 3 ranked teams they got in the next 5 weeks. Kansas was preseason ranked. Arizona was preseason ranked. So it's not like those are like cream puff teams. They've had some frustrating losses too, but it's not like they're the dregs of the Big 12. They're going to be tough games for West Virginia as well. So that's why I do our weekly bowl projections on postgazette.com, and most people have West Virginia off their radar at this point, and that's probably not going to be enough to save Neal Brown's job, just given everything that came before it. Paul, Penn State's got Kent State this week. I think the line's 49 the last time I checked. Kent State is by far the worst team, it seems, in FBS. I think they're dead last in both offense and defensive yardage, which is very hard to do. Usually with these MAC teams, it's like, okay, maybe they got 1 unit that's pretty bad, but they're not going to have 2 units that are completely dreadful. But Kent State is really bad. How concerned will you be for Penn State if they don't kick this team's butt the way people were expecting them to kick Bowling Green's butt?
Well, I think then you start to get concerned because that's 2 weeks, 2 games in a row against MAC teams that you didn't play very well. Adam, I actually usually do not, when I bet, I usually do not touch lines like 49 because you just never know what's going to happen. But if Penn State's interested, and I don't know that they're going to be interested, but if they're interested for 4 quarters, I think they blow that line away. I mean, I could see this being like 63-3 or something. You know what I'm saying? Now, I don't know, A, if they're going to be interested for 4 quarters, because I think they could lose a little bit of interest once they start just blowing them out. 2, I don't know that they're going to continue to like throw the ball and try and get big, big chunks of yardage. I think, if they get up a certain level, they'll probably just try and run the clock out. But Kent State is so bad. If we're not talking about Penn State walking out of there absolutely destroying them, then it's a problem, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think especially the first half. What's the first half score going to be? Are they going to be winning by 30-plus points? I think if they do and then the game gets closer later, I don't think that matters as much as, if Kent State's in the game like Bowling Green was, I think that's the worst case scenario for Penn State. So we'll see how that unfolds. They got destroyed, 71-0 by Tennessee. So I think that's a reasonable benchmark for Penn State to shoot for. Obviously, they'd probably like to get some of their reserves in. Bill Prabula, get him some looks at quarterback. So we'll see. But that's something I'm watching this week. A couple other quick topics before we wrap up here, Paul. How tired of you sit down and watch a Pirates broadcast 15 to 20 times a year. They bring up a guy from the minor leagues for his first game, and they just the layers of smarm they throw on top. Like, how could you not be romantic about baseball? This guy's making his day. It's 15 or 20 times a year. They pretend like we're watching some celestial event that only happens once in a lifetime. Oh, wow, what a special night this is. There's 15 to 20 special nights, and the team stinks, Paul. I'm tired of the smarm.
Are you talking about Nick York's night?
Yes. Yes.
Nick? Yeah. You know what, Adam? I'm going to say this, okay? Those guys have a hard job, man. I mean, it's September. They're talking about a team nobody cares about or is watching. The storylines are basically Paul Skeens and what? And so I give them a little bit of a pass just because.
But it's like that when it happens in May too, Paul. It's always
that's the problem.
It's it's like something we've never seen before.
But I think one of the things about it is, again, they usually don't have a whole lot of things to really talk about, and so the storylines are generally something like that. My thing is. I guarantee you those guys would never say it, but I'm sure they're counting down the days. You know what I mean? Counting down the days to the end of the year. And I think one of the things about it is when you're a broadcaster for the team, which means you can't get into, super criticisms and all that stuff. You got to find stuff. You got to find positive things to talk about. And that's just sort of where they're at right now, is just basically how do we get through the rest of this season without, completely losing our minds.
Yeah, I get that, Paul. It's just sometimes they still lay it on a little thick for me. I think I saw his family clapping. I had the post game on, or like during the game. I think I saw his family clapping on that same highlight about 15 times. And can we just dial it down to like 7 or 8? Is that too much to ask? The other big news of the week, Paul, is Sidney Crosby's contract extension. 2 years. Basically, he's got the next 3 seasons that he's under contract with the Penguins. We all expected it. I think it was a question of how long and what the dollars and cents were going to be. And it's being, presented as, well, Sidney Crosby wants to go for it, so he's taking less money. I look at the situation with the Penguins, Paul. I would have taken the money if I was Sid.
Well, I guess one thing is he's made all this, but I agree with you. Like, I don't think he would have been out of line. He said, "Tell you what, I want $15 million a year for the next 2 years, 30 million. I've given you a discount for my entire career. I've delivered 3 Stanley Cups. I've delivered, MVPs. I've delivered playoff runs. I've delivered, so much goodwill, ticket sales, everything. so much I've done, I would take the money. But I get here's the thing about it though. If you don't take the money and they spend it wrong, in other words, you gave them a little discount so that they could go out and help the team. If they don't help the team, boy, you're going to be really angry. Now, Sidney Crosby is not that kind of guy. It seems to me like he's not motivated by money and all that stuff. But I agree with you 100%, Adam. I would have, if I was him, I would basically say, listen, look at all these guys, what all these guys are making across the league. And I've never, ever pressed you for that much money. So this is my last contract. These are my last couple of years. I need to make cash. And I would have went for the money.
Man, if he wanted to win, he could have gone somewhere else. And I just look at the situation as, I think it's one thing to take a discount on a 7, 8, 9, 10-year contract like he did early in his career when he knew he had a decade left. You know, what was the last contract signed? 2012, something like that, when he's in his prime. I think there's a difference between taking the discount over that period of time and saying, yeah, I want to help the team. I don't know how much taking the discount really helps, because I think that I think there's too much wrong here to pivot in the span of time that it's going to matter to Sidney Crosby. I think the Penguins can be good in 5 or 6 years, but can you really make enough moves with the discount he's giving you to be good in 1 or 2? I don't see them having the capital to do that.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think that's the case at all. I really don't. I think that they'll be okay for 2 more years. You know, with him around, they'll be okay. Maybe they'll make it playoffs. But I don't know that they can, you know, again, they still, Adam, have the biggest flaw. And I know they don't believe this, but the biggest flaw that you can have if you really want to be a playoff team, and that is that I don't know that they have a legitimate goalie. And so if you don't have a legitimate goalie, okay, that's great. You have some good players and you're going to have some games where you look really good, but push comes to shove, can you win in the playoffs with a goalie, goaltending that's going to be average, considering, if you look at the playoffs? I think that's the first flaw that you have. And so, to me, I would have done 2 different things. Either I would have said, you know what, and I know he wanted to be, one-team guy, but I would have said either I'm going to go for the money here or I'm going to go for the money somewhere else. That's what I would have said if I was him. But again, he's already got 3 Stanley Cups. His legacy is secure, And now by taking $8.7 million for 2 more years, guess what? Now he's even more of a folk hero.
Yeah, and that's no small thing, and that matters, especially in hockey, in that world. So again, interesting how things play out. Paul, thanks for joining me this week. We will be back on Sunday after Steelers Chargers. Same place, just check in around 4 p.m. We usually start right after the game is over. If you're not subscribed already, you enjoyed the show, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button to help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. Also, a lot more Steelers coming at you this week. We have the North Shore Drive with Christopher Carter on Friday. Then we'll have post game from the colleges over the weekend as well. So lots of content. Make sure you're signed up, and we will talk to you again next week, Paul.
All right, we'll see you, man.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.